Hello everyone, welcome to Scott Reviews Things in 4.5 minutes. I'm still at my dad's house, I'm still in my old room. And what am I reviewing this time? I'm reviewing something that I found in my old room. Oh, Calvin and Hobbes. That's right, Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin and Hobbes. I grew up on Calvin and Hobbes. I love Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin and Hobbes is one of the reasons I wanted to become a comedian. Calvin and Hobbes was the only comic that made me laugh out loud. Because when you were growing up in well, even before the 80s, but when I grew up, the funnies was a big part of the newspaper. And most of the comics were lame. Most of the comics were just carried over. They were just there for nostalgic reasons. High and Lois, Peanuts, Beetle Bailey, Family Circle. Comics that weren't funny at all, but they were just there because they've always been there. Then Calvin and Hobbes came along, and Calvin and Hobbes made me laugh out loud at a comic, and that had never happened before. I just remember reading those and just for the 30 seconds, the 45 seconds I read it, it was just, most of those were pure comic genius. And it just made me think that I was young at that time. I didn't know I wanted to be a stand-up, but I wanted to. That made me just get the comic brain going. Just trying to be funny. If you can be funny in four squares, you can be funny anywhere. So that's what I was trying to think my comedy, my four-square comedy. If you can be funny in that amount of time, just think of how funny you can be when you can expand a joke and have time to do it. Calvin and Hobbes is imagination personified. That's what it is, imagination personified. And Calvin and Hobbes also had social commentary in the comics. But it wasn't shoved down your throat. They didn't hit you with a sledgehammer. It was very, very subtle. But if you read the comic, you got the humor and you got the social satire. So it made you laugh and it made you think. And if something can make you laugh and think at the same time, that is brilliant. Now, I will admit, a lot of my comedy, people aren't thinking. Hopefully they're laughing, but they're not thinking. But that was the spark. Calvin and Hobbes gave me the spark of what I wanted to do in my life. So from the bottom of my heart, Bill Watterson, thank you for Calvin and Hobbes. I also want to thank him for not, you could only get he wouldn't license Calvin and Hobbes for video games or cartoons or t-shirts. So whenever you see a Calvin and Hobbes t-shirt or you ever see Calvin pissing on something, those are all bootleg. He did not give his permission. Not that Bill Watterson would want Calvin pissing on anything, but those are all bootlegs. So he made it absolutely clear the only way you could get Calvin and Hobbes was to read him in the paper Monday through Friday and on the Sunday comic. Monday through Saturday, and the Sunday comics. That was the only way you could get Calvin and Hobbes. He wasn't oversaturated, so you never got tired of him. You were always waiting for more Calvin and Hobbes. Bill Watterson made a deal where he could take 2 to 3 months off, which was unheard of at the time. But Calvin and Hobbes was so popular that he was able to do that. So you would get reruns of a cartoon for months until Bill Watterson came back. It was like a TV show that was on hiatus, and it was finally back. You got new Calvin and Hobbes, and you would just wait for that because they would make announcements that he was coming back at so-and-so date. It was a thing. Calvin and Hobbes also had episodic cartoons. Some cartoons you may have carry from one day to the next. Calvin and Hobbes had cartoons that would last a week, maybe 2 weeks. You would start with a story on Monday, Saturday would come, the story is still going, Sunday comic was something different, so you had to wait till Monday for the story to continue. He had cliffhanger comics. That is brilliant. And they would last 2 weeks, and the characters, Spaceman Spiff, Tracer Bullet,